Small towns have a way of pretending everything is fine.
Their streets glow with warm porch lights. Their nights are quiet enough to hear wind sliding through broken fences, and their people carry on as if nothing in the dark could ever touch them. But beneath that calm surface, there are truths that settle like sediment, heavy, hidden, and waiting for the right hour to rise. In 1985, one film attempted to expose the fragile boundary between the peace a town wants to believe in and the terror it refuses to acknowledge. Silver Bullet wasn't crafted merely as another creature feature. It emerged from Stephen King's fascination with how fear grows when ordinary lives collide with something their eyes were never meant to see. The movie mixed childhood innocence with violence, superstition, with denial and the comfort of routine, with the dread of knowing a monster, maybe walking between the same white picket fences everyone trusts. What unfolded behind the scenes, though, was even stranger than the story told on screen. A maze of abandoned ideas, creative clashes, discarded designs, and unsettling coincidences that shaped the film in ways few ever realized. Nearly every frame carries the echo of what might have been. Decisions were reversed under pressure. Scenes vanished after executives panicked. Elaborate concepts collapsed under budget limitations. Even the creature itself, mocked for decades, stands as the accidental survivor of a long battle between imagination and compromise. Silver Bullet became a film defined not by certainty, but by what slipped through the cracks. The intentions lost, the arguments unresolved, and the secrets left unspoken. These are the pieces hidden in the shadows. These are the untold stories behind Silver Bullet 1985. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about the film. FACT1. One of the strangest truths about Silver Bullet is that the film we know today bears only a faint resemblance to the story originally imagined. Early drafts of Stephen King's script leaned heavily into psychological dread rather than creature-driven horror. In that version, the werewolf was not the central terror. The town itself was. King wrote the community as a place quietly rotting from the inside, its citizens trapped in patterns of denial, guilt, and unspoken resentment long before a single body appeared. The monster served as the final flare of a decay already underway, not the cause of it. This darker interpretation, however, alarmed several producers who feared audiences wouldn't tolerate a film that held up such an unflattering mirror. They wanted something sharper, faster, more aligned with traditional 80s horror, a villain. You could point to not a culture you had to sit uncomfortably with. Entire scenes were softened or cut. Dialogues that questioned morality and faith disappeared. Even the tone of certain characters shifted, reshaped to appear more sympathetic than King had intended. The transformation was subtle, but the emotional architecture of the movie changed. Yet fragments of that first vision still linger. They appear in moments when the town seems quietly complicit or when characters hesitate to speak truths that seem obvious. The muted stares, the half-finished sentences, the empty streets that feel unwelcoming even in daylight, these details are remnants of a story that wanted to expose the decay beneath civility. The werewolf may be the threat on the surface, but the abandoned tone suggests something deeper, that the deadliest wounds were inflicted long before the moon rose. FACT2. Silver Bullet's behind-the-scenes tension didn't just shape individual scenes, it reshaped the identity of the entire film. Production insiders have often described the movie as the result of a tug-of-war between competing creative philosophies, each pulling the script toward a completely different experience. Some wanted a somber character study about hidden sin. Others pushed for a stylized monster thriller filled with spectacle. And in the middle was Stephen King, who envisioned a story grounded in emotional ambiguity and moral fog, not clean resolutions. This ideological split seeped directly into the filming process. Scenes shot on Monday carried an entirely different emotional temperature from those filmed on Friday. Actors sometimes received conflicting direction within the same day, one moment being told to heighten fear and the next to restrain it for subtlety. Even the werewolf's presence shifted in tone, sometimes a tormented figure, sometimes a brutal predator, sometimes a symbolic shadow cast over the town. The camera language fluctuated too, alternating between patient atmospheric compositions and fast punchy cuts meant to energize the narrative. The contradictions weren't accidents. They were the fingerprints of a production wrestling with its own identity. Editors later discovered that some scenes no longer aligned with others, forcing them to navigate an inconsistent emotional map. Instead of smoothing out every disparity, they allowed a few fractures to remain, believing the dissonance gave the story an eerie unpredictability. Ironically, this internal conflict may be what gives Silver Bullet its haunting tone. The film feels unsettled, restless, never quite deciding what it wants to be, mirroring the very creature at its center, torn between two natures. In a strange way, the disorder behind the camera became the movie's most honest expression. FACT3. The most infamous element of Silver Bullet, the werewolf suit, wasn't supposed to look anything like the creature that ultimately appeared on screen. Early design teams sketched dozens of prototypes, many of which leaned into unsettling body proportions and distortions meant to emphasize the horror of transformation. These early versions were frightening not because they resembled wolves, but because they evoked something trapped between shapes, with uneven limbs, distorted joints, and faces that seemed stuck midway through metamorphosis. The intended effect was discomfort, not familiarity. But these concepts proved far too ambitious for the practical limitations of the time. When the effects crew attempted to bring the designs into physical form, they discovered severe structural issues. Animatronic elements jammed, facial motors burned out, and suit actors struggled to maintain balance due to the unusual limb extensions. Early test footage captured creatures that appeared powerful when still but comical the moment they moved. Several shots had to be scrapped entirely, and one performer reportedly suffered minor injuries during experimentation. Producers grew anxious as deadlines approached. They demanded a simpler, more manageable creature, something the effects team could guarantee would hold up under lighting and movement. Under pressure, the designers abandoned their original grotesque concepts and settled on a more traditional, bear-like silhouette. It was functional, reliable, and visually coherent, but far less ambitious than what had been imagined. Fans would later mock the creature for its tame appearance, unaware that the final version was the last-minute survivor of a much bolder but ultimately impossible vision. The irony is that the most criticized part of the film wasn't the result of creative failure, it was the result of necessity. The monster we got was the only one that could stand. FACT4, one of the boldest sequences planned for Silver Bullet, never made it to the screen, and its absence changed the way audiences experienced the werewolf entirely. Early in development, the director conceived a chase scene meant to showcase the creature's unnatural movement, something predatory yet eerily fluid, as though it glided rather than ran. To achieve this, the crew built a specialized rig designed to pull the suit performer across the ground at unnerving speed, creating a motion that felt almost spectral. It was ambitious, risky, and far ahead of what most horror films were attempting at the time. But ambition came with consequences. During the first major test, the mechanism jerked violently and yanked the performer forward with dangerous force, slamming them into the ground. The collision damaged the rig, injured the actor's shoulder, and halted filming for several days while the crew reassessed the stunt's viability. Rebuilding the apparatus would take too long and exceed the budget. With time running out, the production abandoned the entire concept. This decision left a ripple through the film's visual identity. Instead of the uncanny predatory movement originally envisioned, the werewolf was forced into more traditional grounded actions, lunges, swipes, and slow pursuits, filmed carefully to hide limitations. Yet hints of the earlier idea remain. Certain shots seem to hold an extra beat, as if waiting for a movement that never arrives. Other scenes cut abruptly, leaving the impression that something is missing, a ghost of an idea that still haunts the frame. The canceled sequence was meant to redefine the werewolf's presence. Instead, it became a reminder that sometimes the most frightening concepts never survive long enough to take shape. FACT 5. Few viewers realize that one of the most authentic moments of fear in Silver Bullet came from a reaction that wasn't staged, rehearsed, or even expected. Corey Haim, who played Marty with a mix of vulnerability and boldness, was asked to deliver a moment of pure terror as the werewolf appears outside his window. But by the time cameras rolled, he had grown familiar with the final creature's suit and any initial fear had faded. The director wanted something raw, something that would break through the comfort of repetition. To achieve this, he instructed the effects team to bring out a discarded prototype head, a version of the creature that was rejected early in production for being too unsettling. Unlike the suit used in the film, this prototype was uneven, almost malformed, with exposed inner mechanisms and eyes that moved out of sync. It was a disturbing hybrid of incomplete animatronics and misshapen features, the kind of design that triggers instinctive discomfort. Haim wasn't warned. When the prototype lunged into frame during the take, his sudden gasp, frantic movement, and cracking voice were entirely genuine. The director immediately recognized the authenticity in his panic and decided to keep the take for the final cut. Some crew members later questioned the ethics of the tactic, arguing that surprising a child actor with something so grotesque crossed a line.
Still, that moment remains one of the film's most emotionally convincing.
The fear on Haim's face didn't come from storytelling or rehearsal. It came from confronting a creature that wasn't meant to exist outside of a workshop drawer. FACT 6. A major shift in Silver Bullet's emotional core can be traced to a single producer's intervention, one that altered the dynamic between Marty and his Uncle Red in ways that significantly softened the film's tone. In Stephen King's original script, Red was written as a deeply flawed figure, a man struggling with alcoholism, regret, and a lingering sense of failure. His relationship with Marty was meant to feel fragile, built on shared loneliness, rather than simple familial affection. Their bond carried the weight of two people trying to fill the silence left by their own disappointments. But the producer believed this portrayal was too heavy for a mainstream horror audience. He pushed for rewrites that recast Red as a more straightforward protector, still imperfect, but lovable and comedic rather than broken. Several scenes depicting Red's inner turmoil were removed, including a monologue in which he briefly acknowledges the darkness he fears might someday consume him. The final film instead presents him as a troubled but ultimately comforting presence, shifting the tone from tragic to sentimental. This adjustment affected the entire emotional arc. Without the original complexity, the story lost some of the moral ambiguity King intended. Their relationship became less about two damaged souls clinging to each other and more about an eccentric uncle guiding a brave nephew. Yet, traces of the old version remain in subtle gestures, moments when Red's humor falters, or when his eyes linger with unspoken regret. The transformation didn't ruin the film, but it reshaped its heart. It turned a story about shared wounds into one about shared adventure, leaving the darker version to exist only in the script pages that never reached the audience. Fact 7. The departure of the film's original director remains one of the most quietly dramatic turning points in Silver Bullet's production. Official statements painted the transition as seamless, but people who were present on set recall a far more fractured atmosphere. From the earliest days of shooting, tension simmered between the director and the producers, fueled by disagreements over how the horror should unfold. The director wanted a measured, dread-filled rhythm scenes that breathed, allowing fear to seep in slowly. The producers demanded something punchier, more aligned with the commercial expectations of 1980s creature cinema. The conflict reached its height during a complex night sequence involving heavy fog, multiple lighting rigs, and a carefully timed camera movement. The director insisted on meticulous retakes, adjusting shadows, and pacing with microscopic precision. Each delay aggravated the producers, who were counting mounting costs. Accusations were exchanged behind closed doors, and rumors spread across the crew that one executive threatened to suspend filming altogether if the schedule wasn't accelerated. Ultimately, the director refused to compromise on a pivotal werewolf scene, rejecting a version the studio felt was essential for marketability. Within days, he was replaced. Footage from his work survived only in the form of lingering stylistic fingerprints, unusually long silences, static frames, and moments where the atmosphere feels out of step with later scenes. What remains on screen is an uneasy mixture of visions, as though two storytellers left their shadows layered on top of each other. The werewolf may be the film's monster, but the production break left a scar just as deep. Fact 8. Silver Bullet once contained a scene that might have dramatically changed how audiences interpreted the town's descent into paranoia, a scene now lost outside of memory and rumor. In its earliest drafts, the story included a community gathering in which the townspeople, shaken by the escalating violence, quietly turned on one another. There were no monsters, no attacks, no spectacle. Instead, it was a portrait of human suspicion, whispered accusations, nervous glances, and the collective unraveling of trust. The sequence was filmed. Extras improvised lines about strange noises at night, missing livestock, and neighbors who acted different under the full moon. The preacher delivered a trembling sermon about moral decay, hinting that something far more insidious was poisoning the town long before the killings began. Those who saw the raw footage described it as suffocating an atmosphere so heavy it made the supernatural threat feel secondary. But when studio executives viewed the scene, they reacted with alarm. They believed its bleakness made the townspeople appear complicit, and they worried the film would shift away from traditional horror into something unsettlingly close to social commentary. They demanded the entire sequence be removed. Editors complied, and the footage was archived, mislabeled, and ultimately forgotten. Today, only fragments of its existence remain, a few production stills, and the recollections of those who filmed it. The lost scene might have added a chilling psychological layer, suggesting that the town was rotting from within long before the werewolf arrived. Instead, it became a ghost cut from the film and perhaps intentionally erased from the record. Fact 9. One of the most ambitious ideas conceived for Silver Bullet was a full, multi-stage werewolf transformation sequence designed to rival the great metamorphoses of the era. The effects team planned an elaborate progression muscle, shifts, bone distortions, and layers of prosthetics, revealing a man slipping unwillingly into monstrosity. Early designs incorporated stop-motion animation and intricate animatronics blending practical and visual effects to create a centerpiece moment unlike anything seen in the film. But the concept faltered as soon as it moved from paper to execution. The animatronics frequently locked into rigid positions, refusing to synchronize with the actors' movements. Bladder effects meant to simulate stretching skin inflated unevenly or burst prematurely under the lights. Stop-motion tests, although artistically striking, clashed visually with the live-action footage. Days were lost as technicians attempted workaround after workaround, each failure compounding pressure on an already strained schedule. Eventually, the production accepted defeat. The transformation was reduced to a handful of straightforward crossfades, simple, safe, and far from the spectacle imagined. What was meant to be the film's most iconic moment became its most subdued compromise. Yet traces of the abandoned attempt linger. Archive photos show grotesque half-finished designs, elongated limbs, warped faces, and transitional forms trapped between humanity and beast. These images reveal a version of Silver Bullet that never materialized, one where the transformation was as horrifying as the creature itself. The audience never saw that metamorphosis. What they received was the quiet echo of a dream the film wasn't able to afford. FACT 10. One of the most overlooked creative experiments in Silver Bullet took place not in front of the camera, but deep within the sound design booth. The team initially planned for the werewolf's vocalizations to be more than simple animalistic growls. They wanted a sound that blurred the line between beast and man, an auditory reminder that something human was trapped beneath the fur. To achieve this, sound engineers layered recordings of distressed breathing, strained whispers, and muffled cries beneath the creature's roars, creating a tone that was unsettling in a way audiences weren't meant to consciously identify. The effect was haunting. In early test mixes, the werewolf's growls carried a tremor of suffering, as though each sound were a cry swallowed by the creature's instincts. Engineers likened it to a soul trying to breathe through a cage. But when producers listened to the mix, they found the approach too disturbing. They feared the human undertones made the creature less escapist and more psychologically invasive. Horror was acceptable, emotional discomfort was not. Orders came down to mute the human elements. Yet the removal wasn't perfect. During quieter moments in the final film, especially in scenes where the werewolf is partially obscured, there are faint traces of breathy human textures still woven into the soundscape. They're easy to miss unless you listen for them, but once noticed, they alter the creature entirely. Those remnants weren't intentional, but they reveal the film's original ambition to create a monster whose terror came not from its size, but from the echoes of the man buried inside it. FACT 11. Silver Bullet's defining visual style, its dense fog, glowing night scenes, and eerie sense of spatial distortion originated from a mistake. During an early evening shoot, the fog machines malfunctioned and released several times the intended amount of mist. The forest became a blank sheet of haze swallowing trees, lights, and actors alike. Crew members assumed the footage would be useless, visually chaotic, and impossible to work with. But when the playback was reviewed, something unexpected emerged. The oversaturated fog created depth where none existed, turning the woods into a labyrinth of silhouettes and shifting shadows. Figures faded into the mist as if drifting out of another realm. The werewolf's outline, which had struggled to look imposing under normal lighting, suddenly gained an uncanny presence, appearing in glimpses rather than full view. The director saw opportunity in the accident. He ordered more controlled versions of the same mist for subsequent scenes, transforming the forest from a simple backdrop into a character of its own, alive, concealing, and unpredictable. The fog became the film's visual signature, compensating for limitations in the creature suit by hiding it strategically while heightening tension. Not everyone approved. Some producers argued the fog created visual inconsistency and worried viewers would think the crew was hiding cheap effects. But the decision held, and today many fans argue that the misty atmosphere is one of the film's most memorable elements. What began as a malfunction became the very mood silver bullet is remembered for a world where nothing in the dark stays still long enough to trust. FACT 12. Behind Silver Bullet's final edit lies the quiet struggle of an editor tasked with stitching together a film that changed shape depending on who was directing any given day. Because scenes were often shot with conflicting tones, some brooding and measured, others energetic and conventional, the raw footage resembled fragments from different versions of the same story. The editor described the footage as a conversation between two films that didn't know the other existed. To bring coherence to the narrative, he created an unconventional organizational system. Instead of sorting clips chronologically, he arranged them by emotional texture, fear, melancholy, aggression, confusion. This mood map guided the assembly of scenes, shaping the film's rhythm more than the script itself. In places where performances didn't match, he relied on lingering cuts, ambient sound, or shadowed reaction shots to bridge the differences. But he also made a controversial choice. He allowed certain tonal fractures to remain visible. A sharp shift in pacing, a sudden silence, a glance that feels too weighted. These inconsistencies weren't oversights. They were intentional. The editor believed the story of a community unraveling under invisible threat should feel unstable. The film's uneven heartbeat, he argued, mirrored the nervous system of the characters within it. Many viewers chalked these moments up to production flaws. Yet, for those who understand the film's chaotic birth, the uneven tone feels like a diary of the shoot itself, a record of tension that the editor preserved rather than erased. In the end, the werewolf wasn't the only thing hiding in the shadows. The editing process concealed an entire war of competing visions stitched together frame by frame. FACT 13. The railway bridge that appears in Silver Bullet is remembered by the crew, not for its cinematic value, but for the unease it generated long before cameras rolled. Locals warned the production team that the site carried a troubled history, stories of disappearances, strange footprints found along the tracks, and unexplained noises echoing beneath the beams after sunset. Most dismissed these tales as folklore, the kind of rumors every small town collects like dust. But once filming began, even the skeptics started to question their certainty. Crew members setting up equipment along the riverbank reported hearing movement in the brush despite no animals being present. Reflectors and light stands were found relocated as though someone had quietly rearranged them during breaks. One night, during a camera test, a spotlight swung sideways without wind or interference, illuminating what a technician later described as a figure-shaped wrong, too low, too still, crouched under the rails. When the light steadied, the shape was gone. These incidents weren't documented, but they circulated quickly among the team. Even Corey Haim allegedly refused to rehearse near the water alone after claiming he heard heavy breathing drifting from the dark. The bridge scenes were completed faster than scheduled, as if everyone felt an urgent need to move on. Silver Bullet is fiction, but the unease surrounding that location was very real. For some, the bridge wasn't just a backdrop, it was a reminder that certain places carry their own stories, whether or not a camera is there to capture them. FACT 14. Everett McGill's portrayal of Reverend Lowe is remembered for its calm menace, a quiet tension that feels more threatening than outright aggression. What few people know is that McGill immersed himself in the role in ways that unsettled even those accustomed to his disciplined approach. Rather than portraying the Reverend as a man overtaken by a curse, he envisioned him as someone desperately trying to rationalize the violence he could no longer control. To access that mindset, he maintained a distance from most of the cast, choosing silence over small talk and observation over interaction. McGill kept a personal notebook written entirely from the Reverend's perspective. Inside were passages describing imagined confessions, self-justifications, and pleadings for forgiveness. Crew members who glimpsed the entries said they read like the private journal of someone drifting into spiritual delirium, calm on the surface, fractured beneath. During filming, McGill avoided making eye contact with Corey Haim, unless the scene required it, explaining that the predator should not acknowledge its prey casually. In the final confrontation, something unexpected happened. McGill delivered a brief moment of hesitation, a flicker of sorrow, as though the human side of the Reverend resurfaced just before disappearing for good. This emotional tremor was not scripted yet. It lingers in the final cut, giving the character a tragic depth the filmmakers never openly discussed. The werewolf may be the monster of the story, but McGill's approach revealed something more chilling, a man who truly believed his darkness had purpose. FACT 15. Before Silver Bullet settled into the version audiences know, Stephen King contributed a series of rough storyboard sketches meant to help communicate his vision for the film's emotional tone. These drawings, rendered in hurried, jagged lines, depicted a creature nothing like the final werewolf. King's version was thinner, almost starved-looking, with elongated limbs and a posture that conveyed spiritual torment rather than brute strength. Its eyes were drawn not with rage, but with something closer to pleading. One sketch in particular stood out: the creature standing in a church doorway, its shoulders slumped, its head bowed as though ashamed of its own existence. King intended this imagery to evoke a moral paradox, the idea that the werewolf wasn't a symbol of evil, but of guilt, of a conscience drowning in instinct. He argued that horror should reflect inner conflict, not just physical threat. But the studio rejected the concept outright. They believed audiences expected a more conventional monster and feared King's symbolic approach would feel too abstract. By the time the effects department finalized the design, none of King's sketches were used. The creature became broader, heavier, and more familiar, easier to market, but stripped of its intended vulnerability. Most of these drawings vanished into archives unseen for decades. A few resurfaced years later, revealing the ghost of a version of Silver Bullet that could have been far more introspective. In King's imagination, the monster didn't look terrifying because of what it was, it looked terrifying because of what it felt. FACT 16. A small prop that few viewers ever notice once held far more meaning in Silver Bullet's original concept, the pendant worn by Reverend Lowe. In the final film, it appears as an ordinary piece of religious jewelry, barely acknowledged by the camera. But early drafts intended it to carry symbolic weight, acting as a quiet clue to the inner turmoil of the man behind the monster. The first version of the prop included a Latin inscription etched into its surface words, meant to echo the Reverend's spiritual crisis. The phrase read, "Deus tacet sub luna plena," or God is silent under the full moon. It was an unsettling suggestion that Lowe believed divine guidance abandoned him at the moment he needed it most. Stephen King reportedly admired the bleak poetry of the detail, calling it a confession carved into metal. The inscription appeared in several close-up shots during early filming. But when executives reviewed the footage, they objected. They argued that the message felt overly symbolic and might lead audiences to interpret the film as religious commentary rather than supernatural horror. The prop was redesigned overnight and the engraved pendant was removed. This created a continuity issue, forcing editors to cut or crop scenes where the original version appeared.
Still, traces of the first pendant survive,
In a few fleeting frames, the camera catches a glint of engraved texture, too brief to decipher, but visible enough to feel intentional. It's a tiny ghost of an idea, erased before it could deepen the character, a reminder of the symbolic film that Silver Bullet almost became. FACT-17. The most iconic prop in Silver Bullet, the motorized wheelchair that shares its name, proved far more dangerous than anyone expected. Designed to embody freedom for Marty, the machine was built with a surprisingly powerful engine tuned for speed and maneuverability. On paper, it symbolized rebellion against limitation. But in practice, it behaved more like a compact rocket strapped to a steel frame. During early rehearsals, stunt performers struggled to control the vehicle on uneven terrain. One test run ended with the chair veering sharply off course and nearly colliding with a lighting rig. The brakes worked inconsistently on gravel, and the turning radius tightened unpredictably at higher speeds. Each malfunction raised concerns, yet the prop had become so central to the narrative that removing it was impossible. The most alarming moment occurred when Corey Haim between takes climbed into the chair while crew members were resetting equipment. No one realized he intended to try a short ride. The engine kicked harder than expected, sending the chair skidding toward the riverbank before a grip managed to intercept it. Haim was startled but unharmed. The crew, shaken, immediately restricted access to the prop, keeping it locked away whenever filming paused. On screen, the Silver Bullet chair represents empowerment and bravery. Behind the scenes, it represented the thin line between storytelling ambition and real danger. Even now, crew members recall the prop with a mix of admiration and wariness, an invention that nearly took on a life of its own. FACT-18. One of the eeriest incidents during the production of Silver Bullet occurred during a nighttime forest shoot where an elaborate lighting setup was arranged to create shafts of moonlight filtering through the trees. The crew had positioned multiple rigs along a narrow path, connecting them to generators humming steadily in the darkness. Everything seemed stable until just minutes before cameras rolled, the lights behaved in a way no one could explain. Every fixture flickered simultaneously in 3 slow, deliberate pulses. The generators showed no signs of overload, the cables were dry, and there was no wind to disturb the equipment. The forest momentarily brightened again, and then fell still. Before anyone could react, a smaller spotlight burst with a sharp crack, scattering glass into the underbrush. The sudden silence that followed was more unsettling than the malfunction itself. Electricians inspected the setup thoroughly, but nothing was found, no faulty wiring, no moisture, no loose connectors. One technician later admitted it felt as if something walked through the power. The delay forced the team to restart the entire lighting process, stretching the shoot deep into the night. Oddly, the footage captured afterward carries an otherworldly glow, a strange tension in the shadows that wasn't present in earlier scenes. Crew members joked nervously about bad omens, though a few whispered that they heard movement beyond the tree line during the blackout, slow, heavy, and deliberate, like footsteps pacing just out of sight. Whether coincidence or something stranger, the moment left a mark. The forest scene in the final cut feels charged with an energy the script never intended, as if the woods themselves were reacting to the story being told. FACT-19. The story of Silver Bullet's musical score is far stranger than most fans realize. Composer Jay Chataway originally crafted a soundscape meant to unsettle rather than comfort, an eerie blend of metallic scrapes, discordant strings, and rhythmic pulses inspired by the creature's unnatural heart. Early demos leaned into experimental textures. Some tracks used warped recordings of howling wind, others incorporated stretched voices altered beyond recognition. The intention was to make the audience feel as though something human was dissolving inside the music itself. But when the studio listened to these early cues, they reacted with immediate discomfort. Executives felt the compositions were too abrasive, too bleak, and too emotionally intrusive. They worried the music risked overshadowing the film, pushing it into territory they considered uncommercial. Pressure mounted for Chataway to pull back. He softened the sound palette, added more melodic structures, and introduced warmer motifs for Marty's scenes to lighten the tonal weight. Still fragments of the original experimental tracks found their way into the final mix, usually buried underneath orchestration, audible only in moments of stillness. If you listen closely during certain nighttime scenes, you can hear faint metallic oscillations beneath the score or a subtle echo of a distorted human breath. These remnants feel less like intentional musical choices and more like ghostly fingerprints left behind from an abandoned vision. To this day, a rare bootleg of 2 discarded tracks circulates among collectors. Those who hear it note its rawness, its desperation, and its sense of menace qualities that might have pushed Silver Bullet into an entirely different emotional register. The movie's music became a compromise, but the echoes of what it was meant to be still haunt its quietest moments. FACT 20. A surprisingly early reveal of the werewolf's human identity transformed Silver Bullet in ways few viewers ever consider. Stephen King's original structure relied heavily on mystery. The script planted several subtle clues, pointing in different directions, encouraging audiences to suspect multiple characters before the truth finally emerged in the last act. It was designed as a slow unraveling, a descent into doubt, as paranoia took hold of the town. But early test screenings revealed something unexpected. Viewers grew impatient. Instead of savoring the mystery, they interpreted the ambiguity as hesitation. Studio executives worried that modern audiences wanted a clearer antagonist sooner, and they pressed the editors to restructure the narrative. Scenes were rearranged, hints became confirmations, and the Reverend's identity as the werewolf shifted from a late revelation to an early one. This change dramatically altered the film's psychological tension. Instead of wondering who the monster was, audiences found themselves wondering why no one else could see the truth. The narrative became less about suspicion and more about denial, how an entire community could overlook danger even when it stood directly in front of them. In an ironic twist, the early reveal amplified one of the story's deeper themes, the blindness that grows when people choose comfort over confrontation. Some fans argue the shift weakened the film, robbing it of suspense. Others believe it added tragic weight to the Reverend's character, forcing him to inhabit both roles, man and monster, under the audience's gaze. One thing is certain: the editorial decision left a lasting imprint. The film's tension rests not in discovering the truth, but in watching how long everyone else can avoid it. BONUSFACT. Near the end of production, the filmmakers shot an alternate ending that has since slipped into near myth, an ending that would have shifted Silver Bullet from a tale of triumph into something far more haunting. In this unused version, the final confrontation ends not with relief but with an eerie quiet. Marty wakes in his bedroom after the attack, bandaged and pale, listening to the town outside as if waiting for proof that the nightmare has truly passed. The house is silent. Too silent. Jane enters the room not with a victorious smile, but with a distant stillness. She stands in the doorway instead of rushing to his side. Her expression is unreadable, as though she's carrying the weight of something she cannot say. Marty asks whether it's over, whether the monster is really gone. Jane hesitates. Her eyes shift slightly, reflecting a flicker of something cold. Before she replies, the screen was meant to fade to black. The implication wasn't spelled out, but those who witnessed the footage claimed it suggested the curse didn't end with the Reverend's death. Instead, it hinted at a lingering presence, an infection of fear trauma, or something supernatural left searching for the next vessel. King reportedly appreciated the ambiguity, calling it a shadow that keeps walking, but the studio rejected it immediately. They wanted certainty, closure, and a victory unclouded by lingering dread. Only fragments survive today, a few still photographs and several seconds of silent raw footage, with Jane's hollow stare captured in soft moonlight. It is enough to reveal that the film once contemplated a much darker truth, that sometimes evil doesn't die. It simply changes its reflection. Silver Bullet may look like a straightforward creature tale on the surface, but the closer you examine its creation, the more fragmented and haunted it becomes. What survived the editing room was shaped as much by tension and compromise as by intention. Every abandoned idea, every altered scene, every strange occurrence behind the camera left its fingerprints on the final film. And that is what makes Silver Bullet endure, not perfection, but the quiet chaos that seeps through its frames. Tell us in the comments which moment surprised you the most, and whether you think the curse ended with the werewolf or simply shifted into the shadows looking for another home.